He wrote a letter to his wife the night before he died. He signed it with the familiar pet name she used in childhood, and told her to keep the photograph of their son at the top of the trunk. He did not write about the emperor. He wrote about the way rain smelled in Osaka. His name was Hiroshi Tanaka, 26, born in a wooden house in the port quarter of Yokohama. He had joined the Imperial Japanese Navy at 19 to escape the smallness of a dockworker's life and to find honor in something larger than himself. In a diary entry dated March 29, 1945, he wrote, "If I do not return, tell little Kenji to study and plant sakura where I once walked." That single domestic line sits at the heart of countless pages filled not with grand military theory, but with the small rituals of a life. Tea in the dawn, the creak of a bunk, the ache of longing for home. The diaries we read are not manifestos. They are the private scaffolding of a man clinging to memory, while the world behind him unravels. The mission assigned to Hiroshi's ship was straightforward in order and desperate in nature. The battleship Yamato, named after ancient Japan, symbol of the nation, was to sortie into the East China Sea in what the Admiralty hoped would be a catalytic, sacrificial strike to slow the American advance toward Okinawa. From the Japanese perspective, this was not a blunder, but a final duty, a fulfillment of Bushido, the warrior code, and an expression of Yamato Damashi, the spirit of Japan itself. Sailors and officers spoke of the mission as more than war. It was ritual. One petty officer wrote, "We go like pilgrims, the ship our temple." And another hymn-like line in a junior officer's notebook reads, "If sacrifice is the altar, then we take our place upon it." To an American observer, the tactic might have seemed irrational. From the Japanese viewpoint, and through the lens of their diaries, the logic was internal, coherent, and tragic. Conventional victory was no longer feasible. Industrial capacity, Antofi and carrier strength had shifted irreversibly to the United States. What remained was to deny the enemy an easy peace, and to offer a moral barrier, an act consistent with banzai charges, and later with kamikaze, tactics, where pilots would steer their aircraft into ships. These actions were not the product of madness, but of a cultural calculus. Surrender was an impossibility under the no-surrender doctrine. Capture threatened not only personal shame, but dishonor for one's family. As one seaman wrote in the Yamato's wardroom log, "Better that I be dust than disgrace." Kaiten, the human torpedoes, are mentioned elsewhere in the journals as instruments of the same logic. Men volunteering to become weapons, a grim arithmetic of scarcity and will. The diaries repeatedly invoke Bushido, the stern ethics of loyalty and selfless courage, and they frame death not as loss, but as the completion of a social and spiritual obligation. The clash itself, from within the metal belly of the fleet, reads like a litany of disbelief and desecration. The Yamato left port with a mood of solemnity. Decks were scrubbed. Kami, paper talismans, were affixed to bulkheads, and a hush of prayer descended. Then, on the approach to Okinawa, American aircraft arrived in overwhelming numbers. The sailors described not just the volume of bombs and shells, but a new quality to the noise. The relentless, systematic nature of carrier-based strike groups. Anti-aircraft batteries fired until their barrels glowed. Smoke swallowed the horizon. One chief petty officer wrote, "The sky became a furnace," while another diary entry records, "Everywhere men fell as if plucked from ropes." Their Japanese radar and fighter cover were insufficient. Shells of Allied ordnance punched through armor once thought invulnerable. The Yamato, designed to dominate a warscape governed by battleship duels, found itself obsolete against swarms of aircraft. The crew's realization of strategic obsolescence is palpable in the pages. "Our guns speak in words no one hears," a junior engineer wrote, followed by a quieter line, "I have never felt so small beside my own ship." As damage mounted, the mood shifted from ritual to a specific, mortal duty. Keep fighting until the end. Yet even here the diary entries map the human geography of surrender unthinkable. Men tended the wounded, shared cigarettes and photographs, and tried to keep the ship upright with improvisations born of training and stubbornness. The failure of equipment, a jammed turret, ruptured fuel lines, systems gone dark, felt like betrayal. One petty officer's scrawl captures the turning point. "When the bridge burned, we saw our temple fall." The ship that embodied national pride became an arena of flames and smoke, and men attempting to maintain honor in the face of technological attrition. The page after that line is a shaky list of names, verses of prayers, and a crude sketch of the ocean dotted with life rafts, symbols of a civilization closing in on its own end. Hiroshi's last hours are written with a clarity that avoids melodrama. He had sustained burns, and his journal describes the slow dismantling of his body. "My hands are black where the rope holds. I cannot feel the second finger." He noted the taste of salt and oil, the endless sting of smoke, and the quiet kindness of a shipmate who shared his ration of water. In the final entry before an interrupted sentence, he writes, "If I must go, let it be quick. Think of the boy in the garden." Physical suffering is detailed. Faces blistered, lungs collapsing, limbs trapped beneath twisted steel. Men drowned in waves made slick with fuel. Those who could not escape tried to cling to floating debris until hypothermia and exposure finished what fire and metal had begun. Yet, alongside the suffering, there is an emotional arc. Fear braided with duty, terror softened by acceptance. A line from another diary frames this ambivalence. "My heart quivered like a bell, but when the order came, I felt only the steady pull of a tide I must answer." The death described is not eroticized. It is plain, dignified, and pastoral in its final metaphors. Sleeping, returning to earth. The last image often a domestic one. A child, a riverbank, a cedar tree. After the explosion and the final sinking, the diaries fall silent or are recovered in tatters. The survivors who wrote later reflect on loss with a tenderness that questions the premise of sacrifice, if not its intent. "He died believing he saved Japan," one entry says, "and for a week he cried to the sky before he stopped." Families back home received telegrams, photographs, and a grief compounded by national collapse. Hiroshi's wife kept his letter and the photograph of their son. She planted a single sakura tree in the yard and watched it bloom for years afterward. For some, the question of worth hangs unresolved. The reflections in the diaries are not uniform. Some vindicate the action as a necessary stand for honor. Others, more quietly, ask why men were asked to die in contraptions built by the same hands that once built toy boats for children. One poignant notebook ends with, "I believed the stories they told us of glory. Now I know the cost." There is an irony both cruel and human in the final calculus. Men like Hiroshi met their end convinced that their passing would elevate the nation's chance. In a narrow temporal cruelty, Japan surrendered within weeks. The final line in a surviving diary, dated after the sinking and clearly written by a brother sailor who survived as a coastal guard, reads, "He died believing he saved Japan." 2 weeks later, Japan surrendered. This is not a judgment, but a lament. The diaries do not plead for retribution, nor do they demand apology. They offer instead the quiet record of men who loved their families and their country and paid with their lives. To read them is to be confronted with a cultural logic that made self-sacrifice coherent and a human tenderness that made the sacrifice devastating. In the end, the Yamato, from Japan's perspective, is not merely a ship, but a mirror. In its steel and boilers, the sailors saw their father's stories, the language of Bushido, the warrior code, and the insistence of Yamato Damashi, the spirit of Japan. From the cramped confines of Hiroshi Tanaka's bunk to the bright final flare on the horizon, these diaries map a world where duty, honor, fear, and love entwined. They leave us with questions rather than answers, about honor and machines, about cultural conviction and human cost. The trace they leave is not a banner of triumph, but a small, intimate record, a ring of ink on paper, reminding us that history's great events are composed of private loyalties, ordinary tendernesses, and finally, the fragile bodies that carry them. If you enjoyed this, tap like and subscribe. It really helps. And drop a quick comment telling us where you're watching from. The United States, the United Kingdom, Canada, Australia, or anywhere else in the world. Your reply helps the video reach more people just like you.